I'm Bill Quigg, age 24. Been in the Coast Guard 1.5 years. It's November 18th, 1958 at 6 p.m. I'm eating dinner. The radio man comes over to my desk and says, we've got an SOS and a major sinking in the northern Great Lakes. I'm one of the 4 search and rescue officers that hold duty in charge out of Cleveland, Ohio, of search and rescue for the entire Great Lakes. Little did I know what that evening would encompass. So I start the routine of sending out airplanes and ships from Canada all over the northern part of the United States. Communications was a little different in 1958, and just doing my job, having no idea what really was going to happen, had no idea what kind of a ship was involved. I knew the name, it was a Carl D. Bradley, an ore carrier out of Rogers City, Michigan. That was about it. Got everything going, and it became a big news story as the evening progressed, and I had to call some help with the information officer to come down. We didn't have TV there, but every newspaper and radio person in town was in the headquarters, and it got kind of overwhelming. And as facts began to come, I learned a little bit about the ship. We knew there were 35 people aboard, but no idea any survivors or what would happen. It was a long night. Not much happened other than the communications on search things going on. In the morning, about 8 o'clock, we got word that the Sundew, which was out of Charlevoix, Michigan, was a buoy tender, had the cook on duty, had spotted on the watch duty, had spotted 2 survivors in the water, and that was about all I knew. So I turned everything over to the next officer coming in and go home and have a beer and go to bed after a long night. That was kind of it. We gathered more stories about the ship. 35 people aboard, 33 died. Up to 23 were from Rogers City, Michigan. 2,000 people on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, on Lake Huron. 23 women lost a husband. 53 kids lost a father. I'll never forget hearing that information. As you can tell, it's an emotional story for me. Not for that night, but what happened over the next 66 years. And I'm still involved in that story today. So I go along with my married life and raise my kids and everything, and it's 51 years later, in 2009, I decided to put the Shutterfly book together of my Coast Guard experiences. Didn't have a picture of the ship, and went online and got it, and there's a picture of one of the survivors, Frank Mays, with the ship's bell. And it said he was from Dade City, Florida. So I get on the phone and I call him, and we have a long hour conversation, and I'll get back to that conversation later. And then things kind of quieted down for another 12 years, and I'm going to be in Michigan. And I thought, gee, I need to go to the Lower Maritime Museum and see this ship's bell. And I call them up, and they said, oh, we've never heard from the Coast Guard. We've never heard your story. Would you send us some information? So I had all my newspaper articles. I got my picture on the front page of the Cleveland Plain Dealer the next day, the big deal, and sent all that to them. And they called me back later and said, we'd like to introduce you into the Hall of Fame in the museum and put your picture on the wall with all the other people who died in the ship, and they have them all in a wall in the museum. So I went up and was introduced into the museum and became a lifetime member of the museum. It was about 3 years ago. I got another phone call, and they said they'd ring the bell every November, Saturday closest to the 18th, by the way, and they started that when they got the ship's bell up, and they said, we'd like for you to speak and tell your story at the next ringing of the bell, which was about 3 years ago, on November 16th or something. And it was going to be at the theater. 200 people in attendance 63 years later for the ringing of the bell. Every year it's packed like that for the ringing of the bell in this town. And I've never seen anything like that in my life or heard about it in any other community. You can't talk to anybody. They don't know somebody on board ship, or an uncle or a friend or the neighbor or whatever. So I go up and I tell my story. On December 1st, after the sinking, Life magazine ran a story, and there was this picture in it with this woman and her children. And I held this up at my talk and said, I really connected with this thing emotionally when I saw this picture in December. And I held it up and talked and told my reaction about that. When I got done, the head of the museum came up to me and said, one of the ladies in that picture, one of the children is in the audience. It was a little girl in her, it turned out to be the little girl in her mother's lap. And we came up and gave a big hug. I had 4 men come up to me in their 70s crying in their remembrance at this event. Now think about that. My father died when I was 16. I don't have that emotional feeling. And the reason is because this thing lives year to year to year. Quickly, back to my phone call with Frank Mays as my closing comment. I'm talking to Frank for about an hour, and when he got done, he said, this is interesting, but I've got a story to tell you. A year ago, my wife and I went to Walmart. It's a 20-minute drive, and we pulled into the parking lot, and as you do here in Arizona, and they do in Florida, a car pulls in next with license plates from your home state. Who are you? He said, I walked up and said, how do you do? My name's Frank Mays. And the guy said, are you from Rogers City, Michigan? And he said, yeah. And he said, I was the cook on the Sundew that spotted you in the water. Oh my God.